Okay, are you ready for argument construction number 2? Hey, I know these overview videos are probably super boring, but I really encourage you to watch this all the way to the end because I'm going to try to quickly point out some common mistakes that folks make that you can avoid and maybe give you some tips and strategies for addressing these different parts of the problems and things to keep in mind. Let's get started. If you skipped steps 1 and 2 and you didn't download those documents, you need to stop this video, go back up here to step number 1 and download this document called How to Construct a Standard Form Categorical Syllogism in Response to a Question. Because that handout is going to give you kind of a step-by-step method for addressing some really important questions that you're going to be contending with in the argument construction number 2 assignment. So make sure you have a copy of that. The other thing that's really critical right now is that you go in and you download your own copy of the argument construction number 2 prompt. Ideally, you'd print it out for yourself. Okay, so you can do that in step 2 by clicking this link, and it's going to take you to the page that has the scoring guide where you can see what am I getting points for and how many points am I getting for each part of this assignment. And up here at the top of the page, there's a link to the argument construction number 2 assignment prompt itself. And you want to make sure that you have that while you watch this video so that you can take notes of things that I say so that you don't forget these things as you're working on the assignment. Take note in step number 2 here. If you bought your course packet from the CR bookstore, and if that course packet has an argument construction number 2 assignment prompt in it, ignore it. Sorry for the wasted paper, but you want to work with the one that's linked in Canvas that you can download here. All right, so here we go. A couple things to keep in mind right off the bat. This is the document that you want to use to complete your argument construction. You can handwrite, you can type, doesn't matter, but you want to make sure that you are using this document to complete your assignment, because you'll notice that each one of these problems, like argument number 1, number 1, number 2, number 3, those things correlate to certain scoring boxes on the rubric. And if you do this argument construction on a separate piece of paper where it doesn't have these kind of handy numbers in the questions, it makes it more likely that it'll screw something up and miss giving you points that you deserve. So make sure that you use this document to complete your argument construction. Second thing that's important to keep in mind is you're working from the Aristotelian standpoint again. That means traditional square of opposition, the rule of contrary, subcontrary, subalternation, and so forth. So keep that in mind, and keep that in mind in particular when you're creating your Venn diagrams. And I'll talk to you about that here in a second. All right, so there are a total of what, 4 arguments here? 4 arguments that you're going to work with on this assignment. And they're a little different, okay? So the first problem is asking you to translate an argument into standard form. So argument number 1 says this: people who value their individual freedom oppose government censorship because they want themselves and not others to have the power to decide what information they should be able to expose themselves to. And anyone who wants to make that decision is someone who opposes government censorship. Okay, so what this problem is asking you to do is get this argument into standard form. That means you're going to have exactly 3 sentences. One of them will be the conclusion, 2 of them will be premises. All of the sentences will be standard form categorical propositions. In other words, all are, no are, some are, or some are not. So the challenge with this first problem here is to find that conclusion. Once you find the conclusion, you know that the other 2 sentences are going to be your premises. And once you find that conclusion, or in order to find that conclusion, you might look really carefully for indicator words. Look for conclusion indicators. Look for premise indicators. Okay, if you can find the premises, then you know the last remaining sentence is the conclusion. And if you find the conclusion first, then you know the other 2 sentences are premises. So you'll translate this into standard form, and then in number 2, you're going to symbolize that argument by reducing the categories of countable things that make up the subject and predicates of that argument. You're going to symbolize those with letters, and you want to make sure you don't throw away the points you get for indicating which categories each letter refers to. You also want to make sure that when you symbolize this argument that you include both premises and the conclusion. All right? And number 3 asks this: what is the form? In other words, the mood and the figure of the argument you constructed. So you go right back to the symbolized argument here in number 2, look to figure out what's the form, what's the figure, and you'll indicate that. And then for number 4, you're going to show that that argument is valid by creating a Venn diagram. The Venn diagram, remember, Aristotelian standpoint. Remember the little circled X thing and the rules about when to use a plain old X, when to use a circled X? So remember for each of your Venn diagrams here that you're using the Aristotelian or operating from the Aristotelian standpoint. All right, so number 5 asks you this. Look at those 2 premises of the argument that you translated. Which of those 2 sentences are you most inclined to believe is a true statement, and why do you believe the statement is true? Okay, so keep in mind here of a couple of things. One is you're being asked to indicate which one you're most inclined to believe is true. It doesn't necessarily mean you do accept it as true. You're just looking at both those premises and saying, which one of these would I most likely be able to accept? Now, if you do think that one or both of the premises are true, that's fine too. But what you're looking to do in number 5 is to explain why you think that sentence is true. What leads you to draw that conclusion? And you want to avoid just sprawling out one sentence and explain, I believe it's true because it's common sense, or I believe it's true because of my experiences. You really want to think about, well, how would I explain this to somebody who was trying to figure out whether or not this statement was true? How would I explain why I think it's true? Number 6 asks you to do something a little different. Go back and look at those 2 premises. Which one are you least inclined to believe is true? And why? So you look back at those premises and you think, is one or both of these a less compelling statement to me than the other? Which one do I doubt the most? And if you don't doubt either one, you actually think both premises are true, then put yourself in the position of somebody who would doubt the truth of those premises and offer the reasons why they might object. And again, don't make the mistake of just tossing in one sentence. You want to try to explain yourself. You'll notice there's a little bit of room here for 4, 5, 6 sentences. All right, and once you've done that, you're 25% done. You've completed argument number 1. So now argument number 2 is going to ask you to do something very different. Argument number 2 is asking you to create a sound, standard form, ordinary language categorical syllogism that provides an argument in response to the following question: is spanking an effective form of discipline for children? Now, here's a couple of notes you want to make sure you make on your prompt right now. This says standard form, ordinary language categorical syllogism. That means you're using words like the one that I'm using now to write out your argument, okay? You're not using symbols, but you are, because it says standard form, you are going to be writing out this argument with standard form categorical propositions. All are, no are, some are. Okay, so you're not going to have any sentence that begins with the word every or begins with the word many, because you have to use those standard form categorical propositions. Okay, now the second thing that you'll notice here is that not only do you have to create a standard form ordinary language categorical syllogism, you have to create one that's sound. Okay, so that means a couple of things. One, it has to be valid. Okay, so you want to make sure that the argument you construct is a valid one. And you want to make sure that the argument you construct contains premises that you think you can defend. It doesn't mean they're definitively true premises. It doesn't mean there's not going to be questions raised in response to your premises. It just means that you think you can make a good case in support of those 2 premises. Now, that document, how to construct an ordinary, or what was a standard form categorical syllogism in response to a question, if you follow the steps on that document, it will help you tremendously with problem number 2. Okay, and then you can see, once you've got your argument constructed, now you're being asked questions that are sort of like some of the questions you were asked for argument number 1. Symbolize the arguments. Again, make sure you indicate what categories each letter of your symbolized argument represents. Make sure you include the conclusion. What's the form and mood? Create a Venn diagram. Remember, Aristotelian standpoint. And now number 5, you're being asked to do something sort of similar to what you were asked to do with the premises in argument number 1, except here what you're being asked to do is justify the soundness of both of those premises. And what that means is you take each one of those premises and you make the best case you can that those 2 premise statements are true. Okay, so if you want to cite sources, that's always effective. It's better than just including a link to some source, but to say like, look, this source says this, and this is why I've drawn the conclusion about these premises that I have. And then in number 6, you're being asked, all right, so which one of your premises is most likely to get objections from other people or doubts from other people, and what will their doubts or objections be like? All right, and then you get to move on to argument number 3 because you are 50% done. And the question here is construct a sound, standard form, ordinary language categorical syllogism that provides an argument in response to the following question. Can pets be family members with humans? All right, so now when you're constructing these arguments, take note, right? You got your pen in hand? The conclusion of your standard form categorical syllogisms should answer the question that you're responding to, okay? The conclusion should be a direct answer to the question because the conclusion is the judgment that you've come to and your premises are the reasons that have led you to that judgment. So if you get an answer to the question buried in your premises, you're going to come up with a conclusion that doesn't address the question. It's a really common mistake that people make, okay? But again, if you use that handout with the step-by-step method, it'll show you how to construct one of these arguments that has a conclusion that responds directly to the question. So again, rely on that handout. Really standard stuff here. What's the form? Give me a Venn diagram, justify the soundness of your premises, why are the premises true, make a note to yourself. We never explain why the conclusion is a true statement. That's not how these arguments work. These arguments are valid. That means if the premises are true, the conclusion can't be false. So if you can prove the premise is true, you don't even have to worry about proving the conclusion true. So focus on those premises. That's a note to make to yourself. Focus on explaining each of the premises. You can even number them. Premise number 1, premise number 2, to keep you focused on those. All right, and now the last argument gives you some choices. Construct a sound, meaning valid with true premises, standard form ordinary language categorical syllogism, boy, that's a mouthful, that provides an argument in response to just one of the following questions. Don't make the mistake I've seen students do where they do it in response to all of them. It's like, oh man, you created a lot of work for yourself. And you'll see you've got some questions here. Just pick one. Pick whichever one you think is interesting to you that you can construct a standard form categorical syllogism in response to. And remember, take note, your conclusion should be the response to one of the questions. Your conclusion should be a direct response to one of the questions, not buried in the premises somewhere. All right, and then you'll see again for this argument, really standard stuff. All right, so that's it. I tried my best to go fast. All right, you're going to do great on this. You know, as always, if you have questions, just reach out. And if you're worried like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do all of these other steps unless I'm sure I've got the first one right, send me an email. Say, this is what I'm doing for argument number one. Is it right? I'll tell you. All right. The goal is just to get you to do it right. All right. Good luck.